Okay, so we're going to do the final lecture in Unit 7. I know this has been a really sort of jam-packed unit. We're going to hit this last one today. So we're going to touch on questions 23, the New Deal chart, and 25 through 27 in your packet in Unit 7. So first thing, so we have a change in government reaction to the Great Depression. So Hoover is now out of office, and then we have FDR is elected. So that's Franklin Delano Roosevelt is elected to the presidency. And the first thing sort of to remember with him is sort of, with number 23 here, is he makes this landmark appointment. So appointing someone to an office in a very sort of important, very noteworthy thing. And it's, so why is it significant that Frances Perkins was appointed to FDR's cabinet? She was the first woman, so that is Frances, a female's name, first woman appointed to the U.S. cabinet. So in U.S. history, she was a Secretary of Labor. And it turned out she was involved in many public work programs, including unemployment benefits, labor laws, minimum wage. So she was involved in a lot of the progressive things in this era, and sort of held up her end of the bargain very well. So it was considered a very successful appointment. So that was the first thing. So he comes into office and appoints a female, sort of showing the country that he means business. He's going to deal with things, and he's also not going to stick to just the old ways of appointing someone, just men. He's going to take the best candidate no matter what. So then you have the fireside chat. So FDR is coming in. He's doing things completely different than Hoover. He is sort of changing the way things are going on. So this is where he sort of starts the fireside chats. So what were they first off? So at this point in the country, radios were a huge thing in America. A lot of everyone sort of sat around their radios listening to sort of TV show type things where they listen every night, same times things came on. So the way you sit and listen to or watch TV, sort of shows going on at a certain time, the radio was that sort of outlet at this time. So what the fireside chats were he came on the radio, so he held sort of his own little radio show, and he came on and just talked to the public. So he's sort of informing the public on what's going on, and the purpose of it, so why did he do it? It was to raise morale. It's hearing the president's voice, and he's intentionally sort of speaking to you. He's not just like talking in general, like in front of all these cameras and things. He's sitting there and supposedly talking to the American public. So it's a way of sort of making the public feel important and like he wanted them to know things. They've got this sort of disenfranchisement, or they're sort of disillusioned after Hoover was in office, who he was really focused on business and a lot of the public didn't seem like he really cared about them. So FDR is trying to change that, trying to make them feel important and gain a level of trust with the public, that he wants them to know what's going on, and that also sort of deserves a little trust in him. So you also have a new role of the government at this time. So going back to Hoover again, we went from laissez-faire and sort of all these sort of keep your hands off businesses, sort of make it as small government as possible where you're not sort of going out and trying to affect everyone's everyday lives. Well, FDR had a much different plan. He had this thing called the New Deal. So the New Deal was meant to sort of get people back to work. That was the whole point of it, was to get people back to work. So it's sort of countering that idea of we feed business, that'll get everyone, like the economy, back moving. His idea was, let's create programs, create policies that get people in jobs, that we're going to create jobs and people can have them, and that will hopefully spur on the economy, get us back out of this depression. So that was his big thing, was to put the U.S. back to work. And so what really changed for number 26? So we have more government intervention. So government's now involved in more everyday lives. They are affecting you on a personal basis more often. So it's a big shift from that laissez-faire to a very progressive form of government. There's a lot of intervention, a lot of sort of programs that are directly pointed at the public, at individual people. And now we're going to go through some of his New Deal programs. So that chart right there above question 25. So we're going to hit the ones you need to know. So the first one is the Civilian Conservation Corps. So first off, all of these, so above it, these are work relief programs. So they're supposed to give people work, relieve their sort of economic struggles at this time, and sort of programs directed by the government. So the first thing is the Civilian Conservation Corps, or Corp. So the brief description for this one, so it was targeting 18 to 25-year-old men. Generally, they were unskilled, so manual laborers. And the goal, like the the point of it was to develop natural resources. So going around the country, sort of developing natural resources, protecting them, all kinds of. So they were planting a lot of trees, like over 3 billion trees were planted, maintaining parks. They were building remote roads to areas that never really had that sort of larger roads connecting them to the rest of civilization. So that was a big thing for them. So the purpose or the goal of it was to provide jobs specifically for those who were unskilled and manual labor, so they were not completely left out. Because at this time, we're still really struggling in the economy, and those manual labor, the unskilled, are the ones who cannot find a job, like worse than anyone. So they're really trying to get those individuals to work, to make a profit, and to sort of help their families, help themselves get on their feet. And the other big purpose of our goal was to conserve natural resources. So raising public awareness and appreciation for natural resources, and sort of bringing that to the attention of the public. And over 2.5 million men took part in this program at some point. So 2.5 million people sort of filtered through this program. The next one is the Tennessee Valley Authority. So the brief description for this one, it was meant to, so it's dealing with navigation, sort of flood control, bringing more electricity generation to areas that don't have it, so specifically the Tennessee Valley, so bringing more electricity to that part of the country, working with fertilizers, just economic development in the Tennessee Valley. So really pushing, especially for electricity, so lower cost electricity to these areas, and trying to sort of put them or get them moving towards a more modern society. And that could be one of the purposes or goals for this one as well. So modernize the region, that would be one of the big purpose or the goals. Boost the economy in these regions so they have more options other than just sort of the past ways of doing things. And also, one of the major goals for this was so government could control power generation. So they're specifically talking about hydropower, so dealing with water, and dams at this time. So a lot of people were very critical of individual, so at this time there's a lot of individuals owning sort of the electricity rights, sort of funding the electricity in these areas. And if the government sort of got control or had more access to this, maybe it would result in lower cost electricity for those who really needed it. Securities and Exchange Commission. So for brief description, it's a regulatory agency. So it's regulating something. That's when you see regulatory, it regulates. And it was meant to sort of, what it would do was it regulated the stock market and to prevent corporations from manipulating things, taking advantage of little rules. So what this one does, so for the purpose of the goal, so it was a response to Black Tuesday, so the response to the stock market crash. And it was, the sort of goal of it was to increase public trust in the stock market, in sort of this whole process of finance, because at this time we had this big collapse. People were not trusting it. People knew that these corporations, these companies were taking advantage of the system. They were making a lot of money and then sort of screwing everyone else. So the idea is this was going to regulate, make sure people weren't breaking the rules, and make sure, sort of try to set a fair level for everyone. So trying to restore faith in the stock market, in finance. Next one, so the FDIC. So for brief description, it guarantees your money in the bank up to a cap. So now it's like $250,000. It guarantees in a single account. And it was also meant to, so another for the brief description, to monitor bank actions for legitimacy. So making sure banks aren't sort of going behind the scenes doing these sort of shady deals. They monitor that and sort of make sure banks are staying on the straight and narrow, doing what they're supposed to do based on the laws that are set forth. What was the purpose or goal for it? So it was a response to the bank runs and the banking failures during the Great Depression. So like we talked about before, people were very scared when the stock market crashed. People were running to the bank trying to get their money out. And like we've talked about before, banks do not have all your money at one time in their vaults. So what this was is it sort of guarantees your money, the government sort of backing up your money and saying, don't worry, your money's safe. It's like insured, and you will not lose your money if everyone beats you to the bank and pulls out their money. So trying to, once again, restore faith, but this time in the banking industry. The next one, so we're talking about the Fair Labor and Standards Act. So this is a really, really big one dealing with labor. We talked about all the activities of unions before this and all kinds of people really pushing for new laws to be written about labor, about working conditions. So what the Fair Labor Standards did was, so 40 hours over 7 days, so 40 hours a week, sort of set up that standard. a minimum wage, so that was another big thing. Time and a half, which a lot of you know is like overtime, so you get paid more for time and a half. So companies could not completely take advantage of you. If they were gonna do overtime, they had to pay you a higher rate, and it generally stopped most of child labor. So a really big step in the right direction in the sort of field of child labor and sort of stopping that from keeping occurring in the U.S. So what was its purpose or goal? So the main purpose was to stop overworking individuals. So stop these crazy 60-hour weeks where people were just getting paid nothing. So now you can only work 40 hours. So it's setting a standard of 40 hours a week. And if you do have to go over that, you're getting paid time and a half. So you're getting like a bonus for working extra. And you also have a minimum wage. So you can't be paid under a certain point. And then the other big purpose or goal was to stop child labor. So it's really making a big push here. We're a lot of people are sick of this child labor issue. They don't want it to continue to happen. This was really trying to stamp out child labor. So next, Social Security Act. So what this did for the brief description, set up a Social Security tax. So now you're being taxed for this Social Security. So set up a new tax, and it also set up sort of a retirement or disability protection. So when you do retire, if you get old enough and you paid into this system, then you'll get money back. You'll be able to live and not have to work your entire life, sort of work yourself to death. It gives that ability to retire with some degree of comfortability. And also if you are injured, so for disability as well. So the purpose or the goal for this was it's a type of social net. So if something happens, if you get too old to work, if you become disabled, anything like that, it's a way of sort of catching you so you don't just live in poverty. So from now on, disability doesn't mean poverty. Next, it's a degree of protection. So it's protecting those who work their entire lives and then sort of have to keep working to pay for things. So it's a degree of protection, and it's specifically designed to help the elderly, specifically from working themselves to death. So that was my major goal. And then the National Labor Relations Act. So what this did was stopped yellow dog contracts, so you couldn't do that anymore. So it's saying now workers have the right to negotiate. They have the right to arbitration. So discussing with owners sort of the rights they have, the changes they want to see, and then there's a way of negotiating without having to result in these huge sort of bloody situations where laborers are fighting the bosses. And it stops sort of discriminating based on sort of the involvement with unions. So you couldn't sort of discriminate based on union activity or your testimony in some union-related affair. So the purpose of their goal was to protect the rights of the workers. So now they have the right to do things. They can't be sort of discriminated against for those. And it's also the right to collective bargaining and the right to strike as well. So a peaceful strike is now legally sort of okay. You just have to do it in a proper manner. So collective bargaining is also where you come together, so collective, and then bargain with the boss or the company. So last slide here for 27. So we're talking about opposition. So FDR had this plan of the New Deal. He wanted to put people back to work, but not everyone really agreed with this. So it's a controversial system because we just came out of a different era, so people are going to disagree. So for number 27, the first people who disagreed were sort of those rich business leaders who were being funded through these laissez-faire. So they were sort of talking about how they were used to the government funding them, sort of giving them money, trying to get them to sort of spur on the economy. And now we're trying to put people back to work instead, so the government's creating jobs instead of specific businesses creating jobs. So they would have been upset for sure. There's this guy named Father Coughlin, so he's one of your key terms for this unit. And he was a minister, so that's what the father means. And he used the radio, just like FDR did, to sort of push his message. So he started out supporting FDR, then he felt like FDR wasn't going the way he wanted to, and he was really pushing for a heavier tax on the rich. He thought FDR was being too friendly to bankers and anybody like that. He wanted to really sort of tax the rich and help those in need. So he felt FDR didn't go far enough. He was favoring the bankers with some of these new regulations. The next one is Huey Long, so the Kingfish as he was known. And he was serious about wealth redistribution, so redistributing the wealth, sort of taking from the top and sort of passing out below, and he believed that every man should be a king. So that slogan was sort of associated with him. And FDR was a little skeptical of this guy because he had a lot of followers, and they were worried that if he ran for president, he could pull enough votes away from FDR that the other side, the other party could win based on that. So we've already seen that with Teddy Roosevelt doing that with Taft, and then Wilson was elected. So we've already seen there's a precedent for this, and this guy could have caused that. He was sort of a very popular person for those struggling at this time. Really, really, really likable to those who don't have anything about wealth redistribution. And then the last one is Francis Townsend. So his focus was on the elderly. So this is before Social Security Act was passed, and that's what basically what he was pushing for. He was pushing for the idea of Social Security, of some kind of social catch for the elderly, and that's what he was pushing for. So he was opposed to it at first because he didn't feel like that was completely captured by FDR, but eventually do get the Social Security Act, and sort of his dreams were realized in a sense. So that is where we're going to leave it for today.